Today we're going to look at the second division of my series going through and grading every NFL team's draft from 2025. Today we're looking at the AFC North. I don't really have a set order yet of how I'm going to go through the rest of the six divisions and the teams from those divisions. So if you have a certain team or certain division that you want to see me do, put it in the comments. If you didn't see my video about the NFC West, I went over the main order that I'm going to be doing these grades. I'm going to give you the pre-NFL draft depth chart for each team, look at the selections for each team, and then grade those selections based on team needs, how they address those needs, and various other factors as well. Starting with the Baltimore Ravens for the AFC North, this was the team who ended up winning the division last year, pretty much stealing it late from the Pittsburgh Steelers and fending off a pretty decent push from Cincinnati as well to try to get into that wild card spot. The Baltimore Ravens were probably the second or number one team outside of the Kansas City Chiefs last year in the AFC, and they're going to be riding a very athletic, at this point, very experienced roster. Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Derrick Henry, the offensive linemen outside of Voorhees. This is a very experienced team. This is a very athletic team. Even pre-draft, this team is very capable of beating you in many different ways. And in the draft, I think they did a pretty good job of adding to that ability as well. You improve in the back end of your secondary, and especially now there was news that Ardarius Washington tore his Achilles during minicamp this year. He was going to be a guy that was going to be looked at as a starter in that back end of the secondary next to Kyle Hamilton. So now you have Malachi Starks, who is going to slot in for sure, probably as the other secondary, or I guess I should say the other safety player opposite of Kyle Hamilton. You also add Mike Green, who, even though he was at a small school in Marshall last year, one of the most productive defensive ends in the entire college landscape last year. You also get some pretty good depth. Emory Jones, I don't know if you slot him in as a starter right away in one of those guard or even possible tackle positions, but he is going to be a guy that is not really looked at, I think, to be an immediate contributor, but somebody that can develop into something good for the Baltimore Ravens in the future. I think the grade that fits for this team is a B+ for the draft. Like I already said, Starks and Green could be faces of this defense for the next decade. There's some things off the field with Mike Green that if you look it up, you'll find, which obviously he denies. If everything goes right, which, this is an organization in the Baltimore Ravens where they've taken guys, or they've signed guys, or they've traded for guys who have some off-the-field issues, and they keep them in line. And they not only do that, they make pretty good football players out of them as well. They did get some good depth in the O-line department, like I mentioned with Emory Jones, also with Carson Vinson, and if you get anything out of Garrett Dellinger as a number 243rd overall pick. The one thing I will say, I would have loved another receiver. Yes, I know we signed DeAndre Hopkins. Yes, I know Zay Flowers was a very solid piece at that wide receiver spot last year. But in a couple of years, we're going to be looking at a Baltimore Ravens wide receiver room where Zay Flowers is probably going to be garnering $25 to $30 million a year just off the fact that he's going to be the only guy there. In a few years, I don't know how much money Rashad Bateman is going to either request or actually sign for. And I don't know if it's in Baltimore. So I really would have loved another receiver here. There weren't a lot of options at the number 27 pick. You're looking at guys like Luther Burden. But even later in the draft, like Alec Ayamanor from Stanford, or even somebody in those 4th, 5th rounds, like a Torrey Horton or like a Jimmy Horn Jr., those are the guys I probably would have looked at as possible, just pieces to develop over these next few years. But that obviously is not the route they went. Next up is the Cincinnati Bengals, and obviously the main I guess, contentious piece of their depth chart is the situation revolving around Trey Hendrickson. He came out today and said, without a new contract, I am not playing. And it seems like that's kind of setting the tone for their draft selections as well. We'll get into that in a little bit. But a roster that obviously is very top heavy. Your wide receivers with Higgins and Chase, your quarterback with Joe Burrow, your edge pieces with Trey Hendrickson. But other than that, it's not really a lot of depth. And in the places that they do have a lot of depth, it's not like it's very great depth. The offensive line doesn't look great. The defensive line, minus Trey Hendrickson, doesn't look great. And so on to the draft selections for Cincinnati. I think you look at this as, this is obviously a future draft. I don't see any guys here that can make immediate contributions other than Dylan Fairchild. I think he slots in probably as one of your starting offensive linemen, whether it's guard or tackle, but probably guard, where I think he could make the most out of his athleticism. But Demetrius Knight and Barrett Carter, I don't know how they play ahead of Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt, and I don't really know how the Jermaine Pratt situation is really going to evolve with two younger, probably more athletic options that are cheaper behind him. And so with their grade, I give them a C-. Like I said, the potential is there. I think the Fairchild pick is great, and there's probably good future starters here. But there's major questions with 3 of their 4 first selections. The first one is Shamar Stewart. Is he really a first-round selection? He is a defensive end who had 4.5 sacks in his entire career at Texas A&M. Not just in one year, not just in his freshman or sophomore year, his entire career at Texas A&M, he had 4.5 sacks. With Demetrius Knight and Barrett Carter, like I already mentioned, there's 2 established players already at linebacker. And what are you going to do? Play 3 linebackers? Play 2 or 3 linebackers all game? That's just not how the NFL works anymore. Even getting into guys like Jalen Rivers from Miami, this is a guy who in 2021, 2022, and 2024 missed either half or more of his college seasons due to injuries. And I want to say lower body injuries as well. And so I just don't really understand the thought process behind the selections here. Again, maybe it's just we're looking at the future of this team, but I don't understand how the future of the team can look bright when you're making selections that don't really seem correct. And this is kind of an ongoing theme with the first round picks for the Cincinnati Bengals lately. They took Myles Murphy a year or 2 years ago, and he really has not panned out either. And so it's like all of these resources are directed at addressing the defensive line, and they have really not panned out so far. Moving on to the Cleveland Browns, this was a team last year who was very decimated due to injuries. They didn't get Nick Chubb back until halfway through the year, even 3/4 into the year, I want to say. Deshaun Watson went down with his Achilles injury, and the offensive line really wasn't healthy much of the year either. The only guy that you really could consistently count on was Myles Garrett and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. But at this point, JOK is out for the 2025 season. So even though I have him on this list, he's not playing this year. And so that kind of was a shock. It was something that came out after the draft. But I think with the selections that Cleveland made, I think they kind of knew something was up with JOK. That's why we saw them take Carson Schlesinger out of UCLA with the first pick of the second round. I think skill-wise, they addressed a lot of needs for their roster. Getting Quinshon Judkins, getting Dylan Sampson, even though I don't love taking 2 running backs in the same draft, especially in the round 2 and round 4, those are rounds 1 through 4 where you're going to see most of your production coming from first or second year players. And so I don't love seeing 2 picks in the same draft, but at the same time, if If you look at the depth chart I just showed you, it was Pierre Strong and Jerome Ford on the roster. So this team could use 2 young, good running backs. You also get Mason Graham in the first round at pick number 5 after trading back with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I didn't love it. And so I give Cleveland a B-. Like I said, I love the skill group additions. They technically got a QB. They technically got QBs. And that's kind of why their grade is a little bit lower as well. They took 2 quarterbacks and 2 running backs. You are guaranteed that 2 of these guys are not going to be playing on the offense when they are on the field. You are guaranteed that outcome. And you might even be guaranteed that both of the quarterbacks aren't playing if neither of them pan out. Also, trading out of being able to take Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. I could understand trading back to number 3 or number 4 and seeing what happens. But you out of the top 5 selections in this year's draft, Mason Graham is easily the worst one. And yes, there was a lot of hype about Mason Graham, I think, early on in the draft process. But it seemed like as we kept on going throughout the process, whether it was the combine, whether it was pro days, whether it was, various things, it seemed like the Mason Graham hype was going down. And so to look at Cleveland and say that that's who they got when they had the option of, like I said, Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, it just seems like they made a poor choice with their decision there. Technically, they don't get Quinshon Judkins without making this trade, so I do understand it. But it's still, would you rather have Quinshon Judkins or Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter? I guess that's kind of your choice. Last but not least is the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is another team quarterback-wise. Last year, they really didn't have it figured out, even though they thought through multiple different times that they did have it figured out. This team loses Najee Harris in the offseason. They just traded George Pickens a couple of days ago. So even though I have him on this depth chart, that is, I guess with an asterisk of knowing that he did get traded. Offensive line, I think they're pretty solid. They need a couple additions. Defensively, though, this team is pretty put together. You're looking at a couple of spots where you want more depth or you want more top-end talent, but it's a pretty well-orchestrated team through and through. And I think Pittsburgh did a pretty good job with their draft. Even though Derek Harmon might have been considered maybe a little bit of a reach at number 21, especially considering the need of a quarterback for this team, I think Derek Harmon, he fits pretty well as a Pittsburgh Steeler next to Cameron Hayward, next to TJ Watt. I think it makes a lot of sense. Caleb Johnson in the 3rd round, you pair him with Jaylen Warren and Cordero Patterson and the rest of that running back room, and you want to see him be just a positive contribution in that room. And then guys like Jack Sawyer and Will Howard out of Ohio State, you're bringing 2 guys who, if either of them pan out very, extremely well, these could be 2 leaders on each of the side of the ball for the next however many years that they're there. So I give the Pittsburgh Steelers a B. Like I said, they all feel like Pittsburgh Steelers. All of these guys, I feel like we look at them in a few years and we're going to feel like these guys have been Pittsburgh Steelers their whole life. They are going to be able to get after the quarterback extremely well this year. You already have Watt. You already have Hayward. You already have Herbig. You already have a pretty good defensive line. Now you add Jack Sawyer and Yaya Black to that defensive line. You're going to get after the quarterback. I do wonder if they're going to regret not taking a quarterback earlier. I do understand at number 21, Cam Ward is not available. And I can somewhat understand not being able to talk yourself into taking a Jackson Dart or a Shador Sanders or whoever you want to put into that spot, Tyler Shuck as well. I can understand not being able to talk yourself into taking either of those guys. Again, I just wonder if they'll regret in a few years if Shuck or Sanders, especially since he's in the division, same as Dylan Gabriel or Dart or, any of these guys that got drafted at quarterback, if one of them pans out to be a really, really good quarterback in the NFL and Will Howard doesn't, it might kind of sting a little bit to know that Pittsburgh could have gotten one of those guys. So to me, 3 pretty solid drafts between Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. I think Cincinnati had one of the biggest duds, not only in the AFC North or in the AFC, but in the entire NFL. They were a pretty big dud this year in the draft, and it really hurts their chances to not only win now, but win in the future and keep a competitive team around Joe Burrow and the rest of that offense. But at the end of the day, that's only one of these teams' problems. The other 3, I think they're pretty happy about what they did in this year's draft.